What's that? My name is John O, and today, boys and girls, I'm going to show you how to EQ any live tom in just 30 seconds, whether that's a rack tom or a floor tom. If you haven't, be sure to watch my introduction to EQ video first before you watch this one. Here's a recording of a rack tom played by a drummer. I'm going to try a quick 30-second EQ to get it sounding more polished and mix ready. Not bad, right? Now let's dive into the how. I'm going to start by explaining what I look for when I'm EQing my tom and explain how I vary my EQ depending on the type of tom or the type of song I'm mixing. This way you know exactly how to apply this stuff when you're mixing. I'm also going to limit myself to just 4 EQ points because that's usually the limitation of most live consoles or basic EQs, and I want to show you that that shouldn't stop you from getting a great end result. Lastly, I'll start from scratch and EQ 2 totally different toms again in just 30 seconds. Okay, let's get into it. The first thing I do is switch on a high pass filter on my tom at roughly 40 to 50 Hz. This helps to tighten up the subby low end in the tom. Next, I boost EQ 0.1 with a bell shape at roughly 1 to 200 Hz with a medium Q to boost the fundamental of the tom. Quick explanation, any sound is made up of multiple frequencies or harmonics, and the lowest of these is called the fundamental. For a tom, this is really easy to identify. Try and imitate the sound of any tom with your voice. Like imagine I have 3 toms and I go toom toom toom. That sound that's the sound I'm looking for when I'm boosting the fundamental, and this is what gives the tom its body in the mix. If I like the tom to sound slightly less resonant, then I'll boost slightly to the left of the fundamental. This way the tom still has a nice body to it, but with a less ringy resonance. If I'm dealing with a floor tom or toms 3 or 4 as they're sometimes known, then how I handle it depends on the style of music. If we're dealing with a faster, more upbeat style of music, then nothing changes. It's just that the fundamental of a floor tom is usually slightly lower than the fundamental of a rack tom or toms 1 or 2. However, what if we're dealing with slower tempo music with more space? Think of a band like Imagine Dragons with an epic feel to their music, or worship music for example. Then in this case, the only thing that changes is I change my boost in EQ 0.1 for my floor tom from a bell shape to a low shelf. This allows the floor tom to really drive the subs for that earth-shaking feeling every time the drummer hits the tom or does a dynamic build on the toms. Moving on, whether we're dealing with a rack tom or a floor tom, this boost in EQ 0.1 can cause the tom to sound really boomy or resonant, and I use EQ 0.2 to further tighten up the toms. The exact frequency is really dependent on the tom, but it's usually somewhere between 2 to 400 Hz, and it's fairly easy to identify. Just how tight or resonant I have my toms is really dependent on the way the drummer plays, the tempo of the song, and the style of music. Similar to what I covered in my kick and snare EQ videos, tighter toms tend to work better in more upbeat styles of music, and we just talked about the opposite. Also bear in mind, I tend to tweak EQ 0.2 in conjunction with my gate on the tom. For example, I could choose to have my tom sound really resonant by not cutting EQ 0.2 too much, but then I use the gate to shorten the decay so that the tom doesn't ring for too long. I'll cover gates in a future video. Next, I skip ahead to EQ 0.4, using it as a high shelf with a boost at roughly 3K. This boost highlights the attack of the tom and helps the tom cut through the highs and high mids in the mix. If the drummer is a soft hitter, then a more generous boost tends to work quite well here. On the other hand, if the drummer starts getting excited during the set and starts hitting harder, then I'll use EQ 0.4 to tame that harshness, and this restores the tom to sounding full and pleasant. When I'm EQing a tom on its own like this, then I tend to have EQ 0.4 boosted a little more than I think sounds just right, because these highs and high mids are going to disappear once I start introducing other elements into the mix like keys, guitars, vocals, etc. Lastly, I use EQ 0.3 to cut between EQ 0.2 and 4 with a wide Q. This is very similar to what I do with my kick EQ. I find that there's nothing very pleasant here, and these sounds give the toms a knocky sound. Bear in mind that a cut here tends to lend to a more artificial studio style sound, whereas the opposite lends to a more live sounding tom. Lastly, I tend to tweak EQ point 1 and 4 in conjunction with each other. For example, if I have a generous boost at EQ point 4, then I might boost EQ point 1 to balance it out so that the tom doesn't sound too thin or harsh. On the other hand, if EQ point 4 isn't boosted much, then I might reduce EQ point 1 so that the tom doesn't sound too boomy or boxy. Simple enough, right? Now I'm going to show you how to apply all this by EQing two new toms in just 30 seconds, starting with a rack tom. Not bad, right? And here's the last one, a floor tom. Sounds good to me. Here's a cheat sheet to help you remember everything we've covered today. You can pause the video and save a screenshot of this for future reference. Remember, the sound check is always when I'm looking to set my frequencies and cues, so that during this set, if I need to make any adjustments, the only thing I ever need to touch is my gain for any one of my EQ points. I hope that's been helpful for you guys. Drop a like on the video if it was. Next week, we're going to look at how I handle my drum overheads. I'm John O. Don't forget to subscribe for more.